This is the second homework page for functions and linear relationships. I'll change that color so you can actually see it. So functions and linear relationships. We're kind of going through these a little differently. We're only doing a couple units or a couple homework sections out of this unit, and then we're going to kind of move forward to another unit. So in this one, and this is very similar to something that it's going to give you on the test. Although on the test, they're just going to give you a list of coordinates or a table or maybe even points on a graph. So you can see the graphs down below. They don't have points on them yet because we're going to put points on them. But on the test, it'll actually give you those points, and it'll ask you, what is the domain, what is the range, and is it a function or not a function? So in this case, it's telling you, given each function and domain, find the range. So I don't have to prove whether or not this is a function. I know it's a function. It's telling me, given each function. And then it also gives me the domain here. So it's giving you slightly different information. Just remember, domain means the x values. So domain means, and I'll put it over here, x values or x coordinates. And the range means the y values or the y coordinates. It's just another fancy way of talking about these two things as a function. So we call the x values domain and the y values range. And that's all it's asking you to do. It's asking you to take this equation here and plug in these values. So let me switch my colors here. So the first one it's asking me to plug in there is 1. So I'll put a 1 here, and then minus 9. So this is the work, even if this is the only work you have to show, because some of the equations are a little more simple, especially on the test, you still need to show some work showing that you plugged the number in and you understand what you're supposed to be doing with the numbers they give you for domain, which they usually give to you in an XY table like this, which would be the exact same thing if they gave it to you in this XY table. They're just giving it to you in a list that's labeled domain. So don't get hung up on that too much. It's just format. That's all it is. But this is showing my work. So I have 5 minus 9, because 5 times 1 is 5, minus 9. And if you need to use a t-table for this one, then by all means go ahead, because I know that this gets a little confusing when it's a small number minus a large number. So you can always just do a little t-table off to the side and go, I have a positive 5, I have a negative 9, I bring the smaller number over, and because I had to bring them over into the same column, I subtract, I'm left with 4, because 9 minus 5 is 4, and I'm in the negative column, so it's negative 4. So that's the first part of my range. I'm going to do this again. Y equals 5 times, I'll plug my next range in here, or sorry, my next domain, said that funny, my next domain in, and I'm just going to keep working on this. I'm going to go 15, because 5 times 3 is 15, minus 9. Most students do not need a t-table for this one, because 15 minus 9 is kind of in the correct format. It's a large number minus a smaller number, so we can usually just say that one is 6, and we don't need a t-table. If you were to set up a t-table, it's actually not going to correct anything, because what this t-table did was it flipped it. So instead of having a small number minus a large number, like this one, it flipped it around, so now I have the larger number minus the small number. So it actually just corrects the order. That's kind of the main purpose of the t-table, is just to make it easier to think about. But if I put the 15 and the 9 in their correct spots here, well, I'd bring 9 over like this, and I'd still have 15 minus 9, which is 6. So the t-table doesn't really correct it if it's already in the correct format with a large number minus a small number. All right, let's do the very last one. So y equals 5 times, and I'll plug in my 7. 5 times 7 minus 9. So 5 times 7, I get 35 minus 9. So y equals, and if I subtract 9 from this, I will get 26. So the last thing you should do, just to make sure, since they gave you domain in a specific format, just to make sure that you have all of your pieces together, you should put in this specific format. I do the little fancy brackets. If you have trouble with those little fancy brackets, don't worry too much about it. I'm not overly worried about that when I'm going through and grading. As long as I can see that you have them listed, I'll be pretty happy with that. And they do give you a spot on the one question that is like this on the test, where it's, a line off to the side that says range is, and they give you a line to write it in. So on the test, what they're going to do is give you a table of values, and I'm just going to write that number 2 here. So they might give you a table of values that says 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and yes, I'm being very silly with that. Or they might just give you coordinates. Oops. Undo. Like this. 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry about the sloppiness, getting a little sloppy there. Or they might graph these points, and then they're going to ask you to give the domain, the range, and whether or not it's a function. So to give the domain, you just on the list, you just write out each piece of the domain. So it'd be 0, 2, or 4. And I can see 0, 2, 4 in my coordinates. So I literally just write 0, 2, 4 in the list. If it's repeated, then I don't need to write it more than once. I can. I'm not marking you wrong for that. I know other teachers may, but for right now, I'm just focused on whether or not you understand that it's the x values versus the y values. But if it is repeated, that's actually the answer to the question of whether or not it's a function. So since this is not repeated, I have 0, 2, 4. This means this is a function. For right now, I can't see what it did before these points or what it's doing after these points, but for these 3 points, it is a function. And then range is just simply the y value. So I have 1, 3, 5. I can see 1, 3, 5, and I would just list these. The range value can repeat as much as you want. That does not affect whether or not it's a function. It just affects kind of the steepness of the line, I guess, because but you can have a completely flat line and it's still a function. You just can't have a line that's going straight up and down, or any point that is above and below, like directly above and below. That's why we can't have the domain repeating. And so when you're looking at that on a graph, if they give you graphed points, you can go through and write the coordinates next to each one and just grab all the x values for domain, all the y values for range, and you can look at whether or not the domain repeats to decide if it's a function or not. Remember, if it repeats, it's not a function. And then you can look at, you can also look at the graph and do a vertical line test. If you can draw a vertical line through any 2 points or more than 1 point, then it fails the vertical line test and it is not a function. Again, because the domain just repeated. So this is actually one assignment in the gradebook, just these 4 questions, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I know I did a little extra there on number 2 that's not actually part of number 2, but you would just go through and you plug in the numbers to see what you get for y. And so if you're given 3 numbers, you'll have 3 numbers for y. All right, so I'll do the next section on a separate video.